Viviana Janer, Chair of the Board. We have several board members physically present to make our quorum. The rest are joining us virtually. I'll ask board members attending in person to please speak directly into the microphones so that those joining us virtually can hear clearly. We're all wearing masks. Unless a board member is going to be speaking, please keep your mask on so everybody could have good audio quality. So board members joining us online will participate in discussion and vote on action items, and the public will be able to participate virtually as well. It's now time for the Pledge of Allegiance. I have already asked Mayor McDonald if he could please lead us in the pledge today.
All righty, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor McDonald, for that. So we have two opportunities for public comment during the meeting. One to comment on our action items toward the beginning of the meeting, and a general comment period at the end. If you'd like to comment, this is how you do it. If you want to comment virtually, you please raise your hand feature, or press star 9 if you're on the phone. If you're commenting in person, please fill out the electronic speaker card. Okay. Unfortunately, we had some bad news. The passing of former Stanford Mayor Jeff Triplett. We want to take a moment to remember former Stanford Mayor and MetroPlan board member as well. He passed away on February 27th at only 52 years old. Mayor Triplett served the city well, and we appreciate his contributions on the board to help improve transportation for generations to come. He'll be missed, and if we'll take a brief moment of silence in his name. Okay, now we're...
Chair, if I may, on that note, there will be a dedication of a signage in Stanford this evening at 5 o'clock for anyone who would like to attend.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner Stenbauer.
I can send it to you.
It's the Civic Center. They're dedicating the Civic Center. I think it's, I thought it was 5:30 to 7, Jay. I think sometime around that, but it's on Mellonville.
Right outside the Civic Center.
Yeah.
If you could,
it's not the Civic Center. It's
Gary, and maybe you could send it to the rest of the board members in case anybody is interested in attending.
Be happy to.
That's a very nice.
Art's on there, and I think
Yeah.
he said he sent.
It's not at the Civic Center. It's at our new Mellonville Community Center next to the ball field. Starts at 5 p.m.
Okay. Thank you very much, Art.
Okay. Well, now we're going to welcome a new kind of board member. This morning we're welcoming a new board member from CSX. Of course, he's no stranger to MetroPlan Orlando. Let's welcome Commissioner Lee Constantine. Welcome back to the board. Lee, good to have you back.
Thank you, Commissioner Janer. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. So we have a new beginning, and we have, unfortunately, an ending. We're going to say goodbye to Mayor McDonald, and that he led us in the pledge today. So thank you, Mayor McDonald. We will certainly miss you on the board. Would you like to say a few remarks?
Oh, I think you'd all pray that I'd say very few. But no, it's been a treat. I've enjoyed the privilege of serving up here with you folks. And I remember the first meeting here, I joked with Betsy about, what a treat it was to serve at the big boys table. And she corrected me and said that, how about the big girls table? And so I said, how about if we agree on the adult table? So no, it's been a lot of fun. And been very enlightening to learn so much more about the process than I ever understood before. And the staff and Gary have been terrific. So can't thank you enough. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for all your input. Okay, board, is now time for our Transportation Disadvantages Local Coordinating Board report. Who has that report this morning? Commissioner Uribe, or Vice Chair Uribe.
Good morning, everyone. So we had our quarterly TDLCB meeting on Thursday, February 11th. We met in a hybrid format. We were able to meet a physical quorum. And during that meeting, we approved our consent agenda, which included our previous meetings, minutes, and acknowledgement of comments received during the November public meeting. We recommended approval of the 2021 TDLCB membership certification. That item is on today's agenda for your approval. We approved the QATF recommendation for the 2021 Quality Assurance Task Force as required by the Commission for Transportation Disadvantage Operating Guidelines. We approved the 2021 LCB bylaws, the 2021 grievance procedures, and reappointed the grievance committee. We approved revisions to the Access Links eligibility application. Finally, we approved the process being used to conduct this year's Community Transportation Coordinator evaluation. Our presenters at the meeting included an overview of changes to the trip and equipment grant funding allocation methodology by Mr. David Darm, Executive Director of the Commission of Transportation Disadvantaged, and an update on mobility services from the Community Transportation Coordinator. We did a lot. This concludes my report. Our next meeting will be May 13th. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Uribe. Now we'll recognize our Executive Director, Mr. Gary Huntman, for some announcements.
Thank you, Chairwoman Janer. Good morning, everyone. Just a reminder for board members joining virtually to use the raise hands feature. If you're on your phone only, use *6 to mute and unmute yourself, and use *9 to raise and lower your virtual hand. Those of you in the boardroom this morning that need to have parking validations, once again, should text your name and ticket number to this telephone number, 407-497-1536, for contactless validations. There's the Coronavirus Response and Relief Appropriations Act is something that we're dealing with. That money and the numbers that I've seen for the MetroPlan region is $11.2 million of extra money that we'll be getting. And the guidance from the Federal Highway Administration is that this money is to be allocated to projects off of our priority list in much the same way as we allocate our what we call our TMA funds. So we'll be working with the district and members of your staff to find a good use of those funds. I talked with the Secretary this morning about when that money may start flowing in. We don't have an answer for that yet, but it needs to be obligated by September of 2024. An immediate need that comes to mind perhaps is a good use of those funds would be for safety, so we may be looking at that. Been spending a lot of time on reauthorization of the federal transportation bill. We've heard from, I work with both the National Association of Regional Councils as well as the Association of MPOs with the staff of the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, as well as the Senate Public Works Committee, to provide comments on the language associated with that bill. But we did hear over the last week and a half, that they do intend to have earmarks as part of the federal transportation bill. What we know so far is that projects receiving earmarks must be in a locally approved transportation improvement program. The sources of funding for the non-earmarked portion must be identified and delineated, and this process is going to be very quick. Project submissions will begin by the end of March or early April, and the window for submissions will be weeks long at the most. In addition, we're working on the 2020 census. That's important to us as an organization. We received a census timeline that will help guide us, MetroPlan Orlando, in some of the important work that we'll be doing over the next 12, 15 months. But just to point out a couple of items, they're looking at a new definition for urban areas. They're intending to use housing density as opposed to population for that. and we anticipate in the spring of 2022 to receive a new list of those urban areas. And then in the summer next year, about a year from now, we'll have a list of the new MPOs and the TMAs. But that will begin the process of redesignation. So we'll look at the population throughout the region and how it's changed since the 2010 census. And it could have an effect on the board and the membership, the number of board members that we have. We do have some room to grow. You know that the cap is 25. We currently have 20.
Commissioner Delores.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know you're looking at density, but also look at utilities and infrastructure, because there are rural settlement areas where people can have a rural lifestyle, and that's what they want to keep. Mm-hmm. And so it's not always about density, it's also access to infrastructure.
Well, the density that I referred to is for the census designation of urban areas.
I understand that, but depending on which county you're in or which city you're in, that changes.
I understand. So anyway, by the spring of 2023, we have to go through the redesignation process, and that is where everyone here agrees on the voting membership of the MPO policy board, and that's signed off on by the governor. So in about a year, we'll be working on that and looking at some changes. There was a Best Foot Forward enforcement event yesterday in Osceola County, so unfortunately I don't have the results, but it was 9 locations throughout the county, the city of Kissimmee and the city of St. Cloud. So we'll have those results at your next meeting, certainly. The first virtual session of the MPOAC Institute is scheduled next weekend on the 19th and 20th. We have 2 board members who have signed up to attend that, and that will be a virtual event. The second session for that is April 23rd and 24th, so if there's anyone else that's interested in doing that, you certainly can. And there's also an online version that's available that's a little bit more condensed. It's something that you can work on kind of on your own schedule if you'd like to do that. Additional MPOAC news, I received word a couple of weeks ago that Carl McKiska, who is the executive director of the MPOAC, resigned, and that was effective at the end of last week, and he's gone on to Pasco County. Jeff Kramer, who has kind of worked alongside him over the years from the Center for Urban Transportation Research, has been designated as the interim executive director, and Jeff will do a good job. The immediate impact to that is last month, Commissioner Uribe reported on the electric vehicle report that the MPOAC was taking on, and Carl has committed to completing that, and in fact he's going to be presenting that at the April meeting of the MPOAC Policy Board. And so I should be able to, in addition, the board wanted to be kept informed of the results of that study, so that probably will be happening at your next meeting in May. Strategic plan surveys went out. Many of you participated in that, and I want to thank you for taking the time to do that. Your input will be very helpful to us as we move forward. I have a few staff announcements for you. Last month I mentioned and introduced virtually a new staff member, Taylor Laurent. But we landed a gem here, and Taylor, this month we get to report that since the February meeting, Taylor has sat for and passed her professional engineering license exam. Wow. So we do have on staff now, we have 2 professional engineers, which has never happened before. But in addition to being professional engineers, they're also kind of coming to engineering from a planning perspective. So we're very fortunate to have Taylor and her ambition to advance her career. We continue with staff cross-training. Lisa and Kathy are continuing to flip on the boards and the committees that they work and manage. And this month I can report that Alex Trauger is working to become the staff liaison for the Municipal Advisory Committee. That is currently done by Virginia, and so Virginia is going to be backing away from that, and Alex will be taking over. And speaking of Alex, here he is holding his brand new baby, Axel. And Axel was born, came into the world on March 3rd, And to the right of the screen, we also want to congratulate Lisa Smith on the arrival of her new grandson, JR. And JR was born on March 5th. So congratulations to them and their new family members. A little bit about office protocols. Since last March, we've always maintained some office staff here at MetroPlan, but we've always had the front doors locked so people couldn't just enter from the garage as they'd like to do. And since June of last year, since June 1st of last year, we had a restriction on the number of staff people that could come in. We never restricted them from coming in and working, but put a limit, and that was 50% of the staff. So we had a staff of 18. We said we never want more than 9 staff members in the office. But beginning March 1st, we just relaxed that a bit and said if you're comfortable coming in, you don't need to worry about if you're the 10th or the 11th person to be in the office, but to please be safe while you're here. So I just wanted the board to be aware of that. Last fall, the board authorized the purchase of new AV equipment for this room. We went through an extensive interview process with interested vendors, and we've made that selection. Installation of that equipment will begin next week. And so we expect the removal of the equipment, the installation of the new equipment to be completed over a 2-week period. We have an opportunity between the installation and our next meeting to test it out with our committees, and we'll be doing that to make sure we work through any bugs. But that system will be installed and running certainly for the next board meeting on May 12th. And just a reminder that the Finance Committee will meet immediately after the Board Committee. Those of you on the Finance Committee received additional information in your packages in preparation for that meeting. Chairwoman Janer, that completes my announcements, but before we move on to the agenda review, I'd like to let Virginia take just a couple of minutes to mention what has happened during the legislative session so far. There is some, we believe, some good news on things that the board supports. So if Virginia could take a couple minutes to do that.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and board members. Just a brief update. As you all know, on March 2nd, the legislative session started. And just 2 weeks ago, we held a series of virtual drop-ins for members of the Central Florida Legislative Delegation and their staff.
Virginia?
Hero can't understand.
Virginia, could you see if you could adjust your audio, maybe your volume up on your computer or something, because we cannot hear you.
Okay. Everything is, can you hear me now? Maybe I should just speak louder. Is that better?
A little bit better, yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Is that better?
Tell me what you said, Jay.
No, I can't.
No.
I know.
Virginia? Virginia?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Barely. Yeah. Are you in
Okay,
the
well,
physically?
maybe I can come back at the end. I'll come into the room at the end of the meeting if that's okay.
Virginia, if you could, we'll loop back with you at the end of the meeting and try it again. Okay, thank you.
Now, Chairwoman Janer, I ask that Cynthia will call the roll so we can confirm a quorum.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, good morning, board members. I will start with the folks who are in the room. If you could give me a loud here or present, and then I'll move on to our members who have joined us virtually. Commissioner Lee Constantine.
Here.
Commissioner Delary.
Here.
Mayor Demings.
Here.
Mayor Dyer.
Here.
Commissioner Fisher.
Here.
Mr. Good. Commissioner Janer.
Here.
Mayor McDonald.
Here.
Commissioner Moore. Mayor Nelson.
Here.
Mr. Smith. Commissioner Uribe.
Here.
Commissioner Zembauer.
Here.
Thank you. And now I'll move to the members who have joined us virtually. If you could please make sure your video is on so we can confirm it's you. We'll start with Mayor Bates.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Bonilla.
Here.
Thanks. Commissioner Booth.
I'm here, but you don't have my video.
No problem. Thank you.
I'll assure you it's me.
We'll take your word for it. Commissioner Gomez Cordero.
Here.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Here.
Commissioner Siplin.
Present.
Thank you. And Mayor Woodruff.
Here.
Thank you. And now our non-voting advisors, District Secretary Purdue.
He's here.
Thank you. Mr. Cap.
Here.
Ms. El-Badri.
Present.
Mr. Jameson.
Here.
Mr. Muhisen.
Present.
Thank you. Okay, Madam Chairwoman, we have a quorum. We're good to go.
Thank you very much. Gary, we're going to go ahead and move on to agenda review.
Yeah, Chairwoman Jenner, we have no changes or comments on the agenda, so we're ready to move forward.
Okay, thank you very much. So next we'll move on to our committee reports, and we have our Municipal Advisory Committee first. Mayor McDonald.
All right, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And the Municipal Advisory Committee met on March 4th in a virtual workshop format, and items presented for review and discussion included our February meeting minutes, of course, an FDOT amendment to the fiscal year 2021 through 24-25 TIP, to funding for a links project, 2 railroad crossings, shared use path and pedestrian improvements, as well as a truck parking study. Now, the Florida Turnpike amendment to FY 2020 to 2021 through 24-25 TIP to include connected vehicle infrastructure on segments of the Turnpike and State Road 528. We also received 2 presentations, which included a presentation on the results of MetroPlan Orlando's signal retiming crash impact assessment, and an update on the Best Foot Forward for Pedestrian Safety Program, which is a great thing. Our next meeting will be May 6th, as the current Vice Chairman, Councilmember Keith Trace from St. Cloud will chair the remaining MAC meetings, and will join you next at your next board meeting representing the Municipal Advisory Committee. This concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Mayor McDonald. Next, we have our Community Advisory Committee, Ms. El-Badri.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Board. On February 24th, the Community Advisory Committee met in virtual workshop format. While no votes were taken, committee members engaged in discussion with staff and FDOT on several topics. Members reviewed and discussed the action items on the proposed FDOT and FTE amendments to the TIP. Members asked questions, particularly about the Turnpike Amendment concerning the connected vehicle technology, asking for examples of how the technology could be used and whether any examples exist on the Turnpike system. FDE also asked for an update on toll collections, which was provided by email later. The committee heard a presentation from MetroPlan Orlando about the recent signal retiming crash impact assessment. Members asked for and were provided by email a list of corridors included in the assessment. Members heard a comprehensive presentation from Best Foot Forward. They asked for and received by email a list of crosswalks monitored by Best Foot Forward, along with information about the violations and tickets associated with them. CAC members received an update on the 8 recommendations for MetroPlan Orlando appointees to the committee. As chair of the CAC, I served as chair for the selection committee and put forth these recommendations and support them for your consideration today as part of the consent agenda. The next CAC meeting is expected to be held in virtual workshop format on April 28th. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to our Technical Advisory Committee, and we have Mr. Muhisen.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and members of the board. The Technical Advisory Committee met on February the 26th, and we have reviewed and discussed the amendment to the TIP requested by FDOT and the Florida Turnpike Enterprise under agenda item 9A and 9B. We heard presentations on MetroPlan Orlando's signal timing crash impact assessment, We also heard another presentation on from Bike Walk Central Florida about their Best Foot Forward pedestrian safety program. Third presentation we had was on the projected prioritization and performance-based planning. This particular presentation generated pretty good discussion. I would say there was a lively discussion. Generally, the feedback from the committee members was that there was a need for local government jurisdictions to have more input in the prioritization process. They also wanted some equity in the funding overall when the projects are assigned. Also, transparency was a word that came up in the discussion quite a few times. So we decided to have an ad hoc committee that we would be forming during the next board meeting to try to address these issues that came up in this meeting. Our next meeting is on April the 23rd, and this concludes my report, Madam Chairman. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to the Tismo committee report. Mr. Jameson.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and members of the board. The Transportation Systems Management and Operations, or Tismo Advisory Committee, met on February the 26th. This was held in a virtual workshop format where action was not taken, so quorum was not required. However, we will ratify action in a future meeting. We discussed and reviewed our January 22nd, 2021 meeting minutes. We also discussed the Florida Department of Transportation request that the fiscal year 2020-21 through 2024-25 TIP be amended to include funding for the Links project, 2 rail crossing projects, a shared use path and pedestrian improvements, and a truck parking study. We also discussed the Turnpike Enterprise request that the fiscal year 2020-21 through 2024-25 TIP be amended to include connected vehicle infrastructure on segments of Florida's Turnpike and State Road 528. These items were discussed, but no comments were asked to be advanced to the board. Lastly, we received a presentation from Ms. Colleen Nicklin of River to Sea Transportation Planning Organization on their connected autonomous vehicle study that has recently been completed. And that concludes my report, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jameson. Okay, well, moving on, we will now take public comments on our action items first. Do we have anybody that's joining us virtually that likes to make a comment? Cynthia, do we have any hands raised?
I'll just remind folks who are watching the meeting that you can hit that raise hand button on your toolbar if you would like to make a comment at this point on action items, and later in the meeting we'll have an opportunity for general public comments. And Madam Chairwoman, I do not see any hands raised at this point. We also did not receive any comments prior to the meeting.
Okay, so I guess we don't have anybody in person that wishes to address the board either. So we'll close the public comment section on action items, and we'll move on to our consent agenda, which are items A through D. I'll bring it back to the board for comment and our motions. So moved, Uribe.
Second, McDonald.
Okay, we have a motion for approval by Commissioner Uribe, a second by Mayor McDonald. All in favor, please state aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that carries unanimously. We have 3 other action items today. The first one is FDOT amendment to the 2020-2021 through 2024-2025 TIP. Mr. Caskey.
Okay, good morning, Madam Chairwoman and board members. This first amendment includes several projects. There's a grant to Links for transporting disabled adults within Osceola County. There are 2 railroad crossing projects, one in Winter Garden and one in Stanford. And then there's the Quail Pond Circle connectivity project in Castleberry. And then there's a PD&E study by FDOT for truck parking facilities within the region. And you all have the information on this in tab 2 in your packets. So with that, unless there's any questions, we are asking for your approval of the amendment.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? Commissioner DeLaury.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Keith, this may not be for you, maybe for someone from DOT. I appreciate that they're doing the PD&E for the truck stops. It's very much needed. We've all talked about that regionally, and it's important that we do a PD&E. But unfortunately, the way I'm looking at this is that when the PD&E is being done and the process of PD&E is going to take enough time that the spots that they're looking at will no longer be available. I can tell you this right now, that over the past year or two, several locations that we have looked at now have subdivisions next to them, and so the properties are getting chewed up quickly, and I'm concerned, and I'm not against the PD&E. I just want to understand how to secure the locations so that by the time of the end of the PD&E, that the spots will still be available. Because I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you this, that as the months go by, more and more locations are being chewed up, or locations will not meet the qualifications, and then there will not be any more truck stops in Central Florida. And can someone address that? Is there a way to speed up the process? Is there another way to do the process? I don't have an answer. I'm not an attorney. Maybe Mr. Small can answer it, maybe the secretary, maybe someone from DOT, staff. But for us to approve this, that's a good thing. Do not misunderstand my questioning. But the true definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And I can tell you, as the months go by, all these properties are being chewed up.
Secretary, can you address that?
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members. Thank you for your input, Commissioner DeLaury. We are actually very excited to have been able to secure funding for the PD&E, and I'm going to pull this down real quick. And also additional funding for future phases for design, right-of-way, and even construction. Right now, we're looking at the whole I-4 corridor. The Phase 1 and Phase 2 studies that were done were feasibilities. They identified a significant need along the I-4 corridor. We have a shortage of roughly 700 to 800 truck parking spots, a very significant safety, efficiency issue that needs to be addressed. So we've recognized that need. MetroPlan has recognized that need. So we're very excited to get the funding. One of the challenges that we have is figuring out what the right solution is. And, you know, one of the issues that we currently have is that, you know, the existing rest areas don't have near the capacity they need, and they're also, because of adjacent land development, are now backed up against residential communities. And so we want to make sure we're planning for the future. We want to make sure we're addressing the need regionally throughout the entire I-4 corridor, and that is going to take some time with the PD&E study. As you and I discussed, Commissioner, we're very willing to talk about, you know, alternative solutions. We don't even know what the construction solution is yet. Is it going to be an FDOT facility? Is it going to be some kind of public-private partnership? There's a lot of things to evaluate and that goes into the viability of every single site location, and we have to be very careful of that when we move into right-of-way acquisition. So we're very engaged partners. We're very excited about it, and as you and I discussed, we're willing to have conversations about those opportunities in any way we can look to speed things up, but we still have to do the baseline of what is the solution going to be and which sites are actually viable, and it needs to be very closely coordinated with local comprehensive land development plans, because we don't want to end up in this situation again. So
I guess, Madam Chairman, I guess the question that I have is there a possibility for a way to do early acquisition so that at least the properties that we're looking at can be reserved somehow?
It's a great question, and I think that we're willing to look at innovative solutions, but, you know, we still have to ensure that the sites are viable and that they're feasible and that they meet all of the guidelines and requirements of the federal government. So, yeah, we're gonna be willing to have that conversation.
Thank you very much, Secretary Perdue. I appreciate you coming up and addressing the question. So do we have any other questions on the FDOT tip amendment? Okay.
Madam Chair, I would only weigh in on that.
Commissioner Sembauer?
I think it's prudent that before we decide to spend that type of money, Commissioner Delory is correct, at least in our corridor of Seminole County. The identified sites are going to be impacted with development and vested rights on properties that may evaporate very quickly. So I think if we could find a path to get there quicker rather than later would benefit everybody.
Can I ask the question this way? And again, I'm not playing attorney here. We have one here that does right-of-way acquisitions for other clients. Is there a way to do a reserve on some of these properties, Jay? I don't know the answer, but I don't want to spend $2 million.
I want to hear this, Jay. Go ahead.
I don't want to spend $2 million and then at the end of the day, there's no properties.
I litigated years ago with Department of Transportation at the National Preservation. I litigated those cases at the appellate court level and the Supreme Court. You can't reserve property, freeze its development potential in anticipation of future acquisition. What may be, and I don't want to get into policy decisions, I'm just the lawyer, what may be a path forward for the department and the stakeholders of MetroPlan is to have a meeting with Secretary, his right-of-way staff, see if there are opportunities to identify parcels that, you know, if you have a willing owner, that may change the equation of the cost feasibility of the project. But, you know, I understand the department's constraints from a funding standpoint in the completion of PD&E. That would be my suggestion, is that the appropriate staff with the counties meet with the department, take the secretary up on his offer and see if there's a path forward to think outside of the box. I know that the department's right-of-way staff are very creative in thinking outside of the box to the benefit of the department and to the public. So that would be my suggestion. It's not legal advice, sir.
Okay.
Commissioner Chen.
Commissioner Constantine, and then I believe Secretary Perdue wants to readdress, and then we'll wrap this up, and we are ready for a roll call vote.
Yeah, and I'm not piling on because the Secretary and I have had some extensive conversations about this, and I know that Commissioner Delory and Commissioner Sembauer are also very concerned, especially about our corridor, our concerns about Seminole County. But, you know, this is an entire I-4 project, and we are definitely deficient in the number of parking spaces that we need, you know, for the 18-wheelers and everything. But I without, you know, I know that the Secretary, you have told me that you are in discussions right now with some of the property owners about the potential, you know, to work with them. You can't reserve the property, but to work with them. And I know that, like I said, Commissioner Delory, Commissioner Sembauer, and I are all very concerned about, you know, obviously the 434 problem that we have. But I do know that you're talking to home owners not only in Seminole but also in other counties about alleviating some of that pressure.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Constantine. And we understand the need. We understand the sense of urgency. We understand it's a priority. It's also a priority for FDOT. I just need to reemphasize this is a regional need. We have to go through NEPA. We have to go through public engagement. We can't just start buying parcels in hopes that they're going to work out. We've got to go through NEPA. This is a standard FDOT, FHWA transportation capacity improvement need. We have to go through NEPA. We're always willing to have those conversations about innovation, how we can speed things up, but we still have to go through NEPA. So I just want to reemphasize that and also, you know, highlight that we're very committed to this. I mean, you can see that by the funding that we've secured in the work program. So appreciate, you know, Seminole County's concern. We're committed partners, and we're going to work through this.
Thank you, Secretary Perdue. We certainly appreciate your commitment to this region and understand that it is a regional study that is being done. And hopefully if the commissioners in Seminole County still have more questions, they could get with you and set a separate meeting to discuss this further. We'll now move on to a roll call vote. Ms. Lambert, could you conduct the roll call?
Commissioner Constantine?
Yes.
Oh, actually, do we have a motion?
We have a motion.
Second, Uribe? Okay. Well, who was the motion maker?
Any of them?
I will make the motion.
Okay, Commissioner Constantine made a motion for approval, second by Commissioner Uribe. Ms. Lambert, I'm sorry, now you could do a roll call vote.
Thank you. I'll ask Commissioner Constantine to confirm his vote, please.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Delary?
Yes.
Mayor Demmings?
Yes.
Mayor Dyer?
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yes.
Commissioner Janer?
Yes.
Mayor McDonald?
Yes.
Commissioner Moore?
Yes.
Mayor Nelson?
Yes.
Commissioner Uribe?
Yes.
Commissioner Zembauer?
Yes.
Mayor Bates?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Bonilla?
Yes.
Commissioner Booth?
Yes.
Commissioner Gomez Cordero?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Ortiz?
Yes.
Commissioner Siplin?
Yes.
Mayor Woodruff?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Lambert. We'll now move on to our action item B, FTE amendment to the 2020-2021 through 2045-2020. I think that's a mistake. Tip. Go ahead, Mr. 2024-2025 tip. Mr. Caskey.
Okay, this amendment includes adding infrastructure and equipment for connected vehicles on State Road 528 from I-4 over to McCoy Road, and then on the Turnpike Main Line from south of State Road 528 to north of State Road 408. And you all have the information on that in tab 3. This is a standalone pilot project, and if the results of this project go well, then this program could eventually be expanded to other turnpike facilities within the region. So with that, again, we're asking for your approval of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Caskey. Do we have any comments from our virtual attendees?
No, we don't. I don't see any hand raised. No.
Okay. Okay, any comments from the board here? Okay, otherwise we'll entertain a motion then.
So yes, Matt. Yep, second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Zembauer, second by Mayor McDonald. And let me see, I think this is a roll call vote as well. Let me just double check that. Yes, it is a roll call vote. So Ms. Lambert, you're on.
Commissioner Constantine?
Yes.
Commissioner Delary?
Yes.
Mayor Demmings?
Yes.
Mayor Dyer?
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yes.
Commissioner Janer?
Yes.
Mayor McDonald?
Yes.
Commissioner Moore?
Yes.
Mayor Nelson?
Yes.
Commissioner Uribe?
Yes.
Commissioner Zembauer?
Yes.
Mayor Bates?
Yes.
Commissioner Bonilla?
Yes.
Commissioner Booth?
Yes.
Commissioner Gomez Cordero?
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz?
Yes.
Commissioner Siplin?
Yes.
Mayor Woodruff?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lambert. We'll move right along to the approval of our board emphasis areas. Mr. Leff.
Thank you. Good morning. So we're here again. Every year we come to the board and we look for the board support on emphasis areas. Next slide, please. These were developed a few years ago, and we started off with 4, which were trail connectivity, engaging the younger population, complete streets, and sunrail connectivity. 2 years ago, another emphasis area was added, and that was safety. Historically, what we do with these emphasis areas is we use this along with our performance-based prioritization process to make sure that we are programming projects that not only meet our goals and objectives, but also meet the emphasis areas that the board supports every single year. These were also developed because our 2040 long-range plan, the previous one, not the one we just adopted in December, was largely roadway, and these emphasis areas helped us support our multimodal emphasis as we were moving forward with projects to identify for programming. Next slide, please. So every year since we've been doing these, we've been tracking how well did we do. And this is just pertaining to those TMA funds that MetroPlan has at their discretion for programming. When we first started the program, we were spending about 52% of those urbanized area funds on these emphasis areas moving forward. Over the years, we have continued to incorporate that into our process, and we are now at the point where we're spending about 93% of those urbanized area funds that support your emphasis areas. The number is a little less. That's just because the total in the 5-year tentative work program is a little less than last year's, and obviously from some of the conversations DOT has brought up with the work program and some of the shortfalls. So we are doing pretty well, and I will also let you know that that remaining 7% that is not included in that were actually technology and Tismo projects, really supporting our Tismo program. So we are actually supporting 100% as you would look at it for all of our TMA policy programs. Next slide, please. Now, we have just adopted a new 2045 long-range plan or metropolitan transportation plan. And in there, we took some time and refined our goals and objectives and developed these 5 as a refresher, looking at the health and environment, safety and security, reliability and performance, access and connectivity, and as well as investment to the economy. Next slide. These goals align pretty well with the board emphasis areas, and I did this to talk to you about a possible opportunity of changing the emphasis areas and looking at possibly supporting the goals and objectives in a different way as we go forward with prioritization and programming. So next slide, please. Part of our performance-based planning process is we have several performance measures that we use to help rank and identify those projects that are high priority for programming in that next 5th year of the work program. This slide and then the next slide has the 26 performance measures that we adopted within the Metropolitan Transportation Plan that we will use during this next couple month process to help develop those priorities. Now, when we had the emphasis areas, we would also add in that as a measure when prioritizing projects. Now, we can continue to do that method. Next slide, please. Or we could look at possibly using these goals and objectives to help rank or weight that prioritization process. Since each one of those performance measures is attached to a goal, we could use these goals and help identify the weighting and see annually which some of these goals should be higher prioritized versus not. And I'm sure we'll be getting into that conversation later with Emily and talking about the best foot forward. But this is how the goals ranked as we went through our public engagement process, looking at what was the top ranked projects. So investment and economy all the way down to safety and security. What we found from the public is there really wasn't that much difference. So as we went through the plan process, we kind of had a equal weighting as we were looking at priorities. Now, can you go to the next slide, please? But what was interesting is we did the survey before the pandemic and then post-pandemic. So it's very interesting to see how those changed over time, especially as the circumstances have changed. So with this, we were thinking about using, again, these goals and objectives to help weight those priorities as we go through the process. And that way we have a direct linkage from the Metropolitan Transportation Plan through our prioritization process as projects go into our transportation improvement program. It just seems like a seamless linkage. So next slide, please. So what I'm asking is not really just a support of the emphasis areas in this meeting. It's actually a question to the board is, would you like to continue using the emphasis areas, which as we go through our performance-based prioritization, we will continue to focus on those emphasis areas as we prioritize projects? Or would you like to start using the goals and objectives? And what I am proposing is, if that is the case, then at the next meeting, the May meeting, we will work towards some sort of polling or ranking process where the board could rank each one of these goals and objectives, which then we will use in our prioritization process for this coming year, which we'll present back to you in June and July. And with that in backup material, I can also provide each one of those performance measures that go along with the goals to help you make those decisions at the next board meeting. So with that, I will open it up to the chair and the board and answer any questions and look for direction.
Sure. Commissioner Delary, then Commissioner Moore.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Nick, appreciate the presentation. I just received a copy of the infamous report, Dangerous by Design. It's, I think this is the 11th or the 12th year that it's been out. And it's also the 11th or 12th year that the state of Florida is ranked #1 for the most dangerous place to be as a pedestrian. Didn't say live, just be. I'm concerned about it, and as this report came out again, I think it was yesterday, we're still ranked #1 in the region. The region is ranked #1 in the nation, which I think says something. And the issue with that, and it's all governed by the PDI. The PDI is the Pedestrian Danger Index. And that is something that can absolutely be measured, and that's how we're being judged. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because not just us, but the state and the feds are looking at performance measurements. I believe that's correct, Gary, correct?
That's right.
And this is going to be one of the things that we're going to be judged by. And since there's a report out there nationally, I've already gotten several phone calls from people around the country like, oh, you guys made it again. Congratulations. That's not a list that I want to be a part of. So the point that I'm getting at is that I really think the performance criteria is extremely important. And I think safety needs to be our #1 paramount issue no matter what we do, because it doesn't look at age, it doesn't look at geographic areas, it looks at all areas. And I really think that we owe it to all our citizens to make sure that we are making this a safe place for pedestrians. And so as we move forward, I'm hoping that, and I'm going to be asking, I would ask us all to really read the book or the report, Dangerous by Design. If you want a copy of it, I'm sure we can get it. I can send it to Gary. And it's important that we not only look at it, understand it, but understand the PDI index and how it plays an important role. Because if we're going to move forward after this pandemic and go back to tourism, I'm sure the people from around the country as well as the globe want to make sure that it's safe to walk around. I'm even more positive that the residents here in Central Florida want to make sure that they're all safe when they cross streets. I do a lot of walking myself, and I got to tell you, you do take your life in your hands when you cross an intersection, even if there is a traffic light. And something needs to be done, and I'm hoping that as we move forward, these projects that we're approving, not just locally but regionally, are being judged by a safety performance index and how we're moving the needle. Because if it's all about cars, that's not what we should be about. We should be about pedestrians as well. If that's the case, just put a road over all of Central Florida and get them from point A to point B and be done with it. But I really think that we need to be looking at it from a safety standpoint. And I really believe that safety needs to be paramount, #1 in our judging of our projects and to moving the needle. That's my first comment. A little long-winded, but that's where I'm at.
Okay. So we have a few other requests to comment. So we have Commissioner Moore, then Commissioner Reed, then Commissioner Demings. So go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner Jayer. I actually was going to talk about safety as well. And in the metrics, Nick, you didn't have any kind of item about street lighting. In my experience, my office, we don't have a good way with Duke with turning in street lights, burned out lights, and
Yeah.
FDOT, and I'm doing it myself. We did it last night on the way home. I called my secretary and we turned them in, and we'll have roads with half of the lights burnt out, and I've had a child hit, and lo and behold, the lights were on in that area. So I don't know. I know Mr. Perdue is here. If there's a better way, a better process, or if that could be included to look at the lighting along all of our roadways.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and I'm sure staff is taking comments so that we could follow up and send pertinent information. And if Secretary Perdue wants to answer at the end or has anything to add, just let me know. Commissioner Reeby.
Yes, I also, actually, Nick, I had a question about the investment level that came in, number one. If you could explain that a little bit, and then I also had a comment about the pedestrian too.
Certainly. Would you mind going back to the slide deck? And we had a couple of those which actually had the performance measures that were listed under the investment and economy, which would make it easier to review those with you, Commissioner. So, and right, that one more forward. Oh, nope. Back two more. We were down there with the matrix. It's the other direction. And stop on the next one, that one right there. Great. So here are some of the performance measures that we have under the goal of investment and economy, where we will look at, depending on the list that we have in our project priority list, metrics for truck percentage, bottlenecks within the freight, the intensity and proximity of those freight centers, change in those vehicle hours of travel, which has a big influence on the economy and travel time reliability, cost burden households, visitor traffic, and congestion. So those are the metrics that we will use for each segment within our network to prioritize those projects that we've identified as needs or cost feasible projects in our metropolitan transportation plan. That same process, this is what we've been doing over the past couple years, but those were all tied to our 2040 plan, which didn't have as robust multimodal performance measures since we had to link it to that plan that was more of a roadway, highway widening vision. This plan is much more multimodal, which we've added several more performance measures that start focusing on that more accessibility to essential services, access to jobs and employment centers, as well as the safety. If you can go back one slide, please, and we can go over the safety performance measures, which have all of the major performance measures that I reported on last month with the federal, which talks about highway safety, fatalities, injuries, and also non-motorized fatalities and injuries as separate metrics. So we will use those to help rank each project. And I guess what I'm asking is, and what I heard, is that if safety would be the #1 priority from the board, say this year, as we're discussing it, then that would have a higher weight. So those values and those performance measures would rank higher as we compared them to the other goals as we went through the process.
That's great. Can I get a copy of that? Or Gary, could I request a copy? And then on the pedestrian side, I agree with everyone that said something here, but something that's very concerning to me, and I appreciate the billboard campaign that's going on, is pedestrian education. Because most of the violations, someone who drives Orange Blossom Trail on a daily basis, even with these amazing crosswalks that we've put in that literally force the cars to stop, we can't get the pedestrians to use them in the appropriate way. And it is frightening. I did a ride along with the sheriff's office when the mayor was the sheriff, and one of the calls was somebody dying on OBT, hit by a Papa John's driver, because there was just no consistency with pedestrian education. And it really, that's concerning to me. And I have Cimarron Boulevard too, which is another one. I would be terrified, and I see a lot of strollers, families crossing because they're getting to the Walmart, and it's just such a high dense area. So we can't ignore the pedestrian part of it. And I know that we do everything, but how more creative can we get, But thank you.
And that is,
No, I think I share the concerns of several of our board members, and while Nick did a good job of making a presentation, I do believe that we need to reprioritize where we have safety. In Commissioner DeLara's comments, he indicated that we were number one, but we're number one worst.
That's correct, Mayor.
We're number one worst in the nation.
I want to be number 10.
And we've been there. And there was an article, I think it came out today, that Kevin Spears wrote from the Orlando Sentinel. And I really thought that it was a fairly balanced article in that he shared some of the initiatives that we do have going forward in the region. And as they talked about the Metro Orlando area, they, of course, talked about the metropolitan statistical area that encompasses the entire region. And I do believe that we should better understand on that Dangerous by Design report how we got there. And perhaps, I know that later today we'll have a presentation on the Best Foot Forward program. That's one of many things that we are doing here to try to address the issues related to pedestrian safety. But it may not be enough, and so I believe that perhaps if at the next board meeting we're going to reprioritize and further identify what the focus areas should be, we do need, I think, a specific update about how we got to be the number one worst in the nation, number one worst in Florida, So I think that requires a little bit more detailed emphasis so that collectively, when we go through our various budgetary processes, that we look to how we can collaborate across jurisdictional lines to ensure that we are addressing that. I think we don't want to continue coming out as the number one worst year after year after year. It suggests that we are blind to the facts, and I don't think that any of us want to be in that position because we do care. Safety is the fundamental reason that government exists, and so I think we need to improve that. We want to move up somewhere on that list, So I just say, even I know Kevin Spears is probably listening. I do appreciate whenever we have our media partners or stakeholders who do write balanced articles. So those are my comments.
Mayor Dyer.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I agree with pretty much everything that's been brought up. Following up on Commissioner DeLaury and Mayor Demings, I talked to Gary this morning. We see lots of surveys, and we're ranked number one in a lot of good things as well. Mm-hmm. But some of it goes into what the criteria are for how you're judging things. And I agree we need to work on pedestrian safety, but I asked Gary about doing a deep dive into what are the criteria, because I don't think it's judged simply by pedestrian accidents per capita. There's a whole bunch of other factors, and some of it's the walkability of a neighborhood and different things like that. So I think it'd be incumbent on the board to have let's do a deep dive next meeting and understand what the criteria are that they are using to make that analysis, because 7 out of the top 10 are in Florida, and then so the others are in California, I think. So they're sunshine states. Does it have to do also with the fact that we can walk year-round and things of that nature? There are some things that we can probably correct or at least try to improve on, and there are some others that may be out of our control. And I'm sure I'd like to see whether the criteria, if there is population-based, also includes the fact that we, in normal years, have 70 million visitors from outside the region that probably aren't counted in that. We see that a lot in different types of surveys, including funding. And then also, if we're very concerned about pedestrian safety, the priorities that we have, there's only one measurement related to pedestrian safety within the 4 areas under safety. If we could go back to that slide, it's more traffic accidents and I can't remember what fatalities. And there was one on safety, or on pedestrian safety. So if we take a look at what the criteria is in this report, it may be that we want to add a couple other priority areas to focus on based on what those are. Not just saying we want to gain the report by doing those things, but there probably are some things we can do to enhance our position in that report.
Well, we are facing a question today whether we want to continue with the emphasis areas or change it to the chart that Mr. Lepp was showing. Let me ask you a question, Gary. In terms of this item, it seems like we have a lot of discussion. I think everybody made a lot of good points on safety. I think we all agree that we want our region to be as safe as possible. But there are a lot of factors. Commissioner Uribe, I'm with you 100%. Just the other day we had, unfortunately, a pedestrian fatality and on a lighted crosswalk area. And so, there is a lot to say about educating the pedestrian as well. So is there a time sensitivity that we have to vote on this item and this meeting, or is this something that could be moved? And I'll get to you in a second, Commissioner Bobby. Or Mr. Leff, do you want to answer that?
Chairwoman Joyner, that we can move this to the next meeting. There's no time sensitivity to it at all.
Because I think that everybody would appreciate a little bit of time to look at this a little bit deeper and maybe have some recommendations based on the comments from today of reprioritizing some of the things. Commissioner Lulari.
Thank you. I think this is, and Madam Chair, you're absolutely right. I think we need to take our time to make sure this is done the right way. A lot of great input, and I think we're all looking at this the right way from different positions, obviously, because not one piece is correct. It's a whole narrative of things. But when you talk about safety, we need to make sure that we're looking at safety from the state perspective as well as the federal perspective. I'd love to also see a workshop from the Federal Highway group, because we're going to be judged at some point on performance measures, and depending upon how we do with our performance measures, I want to make sure that we're looking at everything clearly, and I think that we need to also be looking at, once we do a project, to do a 2-year look or a 1.5-year look or whatever that time period is, to make sure, did we really move the needle? Did we do something? Just like what they talked about, Commissioner Uribe, with those crosswalks. Did we really accomplish anything? And should we step up our educational program? That's when that would get flushed out. So I think that's an excellent point. So we need to be looking at not just safety from our perspective, but from the state and the feds. But we're blessed to have the Secretary here. I'd like to see if he has any additional input, because I know safety is a priority for them as well.
Well, we'll get to Secretary Perdue after we're finished with member comments. We have a couple more people that would like to input. Mayor McDonald, I know you're next, and then Commissioner Sedbauer.
Madam Chairwoman, you also have a hand raised from the virtual side from Mr. Muhaisen.
Okay, and he will come in after Commissioner Sedbauer. Thank you very much, Cynthia.
Yeah,
Mayor McDonald.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I have to agree with everybody. But something that's fundamental here is that none of this happens without commitment on behalf of this board. And at some point in time, we're going to get weary of being number one. And as despicable as that is, it's not going to happen unless this group makes it happen. And so that kind of commitment is going to be essential. And, it's very clear. So either get in the game and we decide we're going to come up with some solutions that we think have a realistic opportunity to succeed, or not.
Thank you. Commissioner Sedbauer?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would concur with what has been said here this morning. I think ultimately we all have to agree, what happens in Central Florida, Orlando, greater metropolitan area is much different than happens in farmland, Kansas. you know, to me, I think what's lacking here is we've had all this education, we've done all these things, we've spent all this money doing studying. Until we take a deep dive in a human factors review of what really is happening in this corridor as compared to what's happening around other parts of the country, as pointed out by the mayor, is that we have people coming to our community from not only all over the country, but all over the world. And what they are accustomed to engaging in our roadways and walking areas is much different from where they come. So I think, you know, I would like to see us engage some human factors study on how we identify this region and how we address those issues, because it's multifaceted. It's not only driver distraction for the drivers, but it's also the pedestrians themselves and the familiarity with the areas and how to direct or almost force pedestrians to only be able to cross in a certain area. So I think unless we have a human factors study, deep dive in this, we're just throwing money and guessing at best.
Commissioner Stenbauer, we're going to have Mr. Muhaisen next, but I'll tell you, coming from New York City, which is a lot denser than Central Florida, tons of pedestrians, I will tell you that some of those things that you mentioned are things that are done in bigger cities, forcing, you know, people to cross at certain parts. But it very much depends on densities and the amount of pedestrians. That's just, you know, I'll tell you, Osceola County was not built for pedestrian. We're now going back and trying to build sidewalks. I mean, we have entire areas, entire communities, and large areas that were built without sidewalks. So that in of itself is a factor that plays in all of this. So I love Mayor Dyer's suggestion of looking at all the criteria and what are the different things that go into the scoring, so that you know, we've made number one on this very undesirable list year after year after year. Mr. Muhaisen.
Thank you, Chairwoman. And to your point and to Mayor Dyer's point, I also, from a traffic engineering standpoint, with all the miles and miles of sidewalks that we've been implementing and constructing in the past years, and as well as implementing complete street programs in our designs, multiple education events that's nonstop pretty much, and you'll hear one today from Best Foot Forward. I really find it hard to believe that there's not an iota of improvement in Central Florida, which makes me want to perhaps address from our standpoint as a board, what issues do they not realize that we have improved? What issues do we need to improve furthermore? And also, perhaps they need some education on what we have done. I mean, at some point, I think we need to toot our own horn. There's been a lot from, at least as a small municipal, government in Kissimmee, we have done quite a bit, and we're involved in a lot. And I know we're just a small participant, and there's a lot more, participation from the Tri-County area. So I just think it's time that we let them know that here's what we do, and please take that into consideration.
Yeah, Mr. Muhaisen, listening to your comments, it's true. I mean, I know at least in Osceola County, every time we are either widening roadway or doing new road, we're doing them as a complete street, and we're hoping that moves the needle. It's almost as if it would be great if we could dissect their scoring, if they have 10 categories, see what the scoring is in each category and what that has been, and see if we've moved the needle in any particular area, and if there's some place where we're just not making any progress. I think that would be great if we had access to that sort of information. I'm going to ask if there's any other board member comments, and then I'm going to ask Secretary Redu if he would like to add something or not. Anybody else? Okay, Commissioner Stenbauer?
Follow up. I think that we would really need to have a full investigation of those events as to how they were hit, how those pedestrians were killed, an investigation of understanding why on each of those, whether that was a driver distraction issue, whether it was a pedestrian crossing in the wrong place. It's easy for us to sit here and say, these are all the things that were being scored this way. Unless we understand the root cause of why something happened, I don't know that we can ultimately address that. And just understanding why did this particular event happen at OBT and whatever intersection, or 436 and whatever intersection. Is it because the pedestrian crossed in the wrong place? Is it because there was some kind of issue in the roadway that didn't allow a driver to see, or was a driver distraction? It's easy to count them. If you don't know why it's being counted, I think is something we've really got to look at.
Yeah, I know that, for example, on our Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission, anytime there is a fatality with somebody struck by train, we do get a report as to what happened. Perhaps that's something that we could look at quarterly here as an information packet in our books. Commissioner DeLauria, you have been wanting to speak.
It's not about the deaths. It is about the deaths, but it's not about the deaths. The way the calculation is done is pedestrian deaths divided by population, multiplied by 100,000, divided by the work trips made by walking. That's the calculation. It doesn't go into who's at fault. They normalize this thing. I actually spoke to the person that developed that calculation up in D.C. It is not about who's at fault. It's about walkability, and it's about that walking trip. That's the whole calculation. And they did that because they wanted to normalize it, because it wasn't fair, but the Northeast was more of a walkable community than the South. And so when you look at that calculation, it makes it very normal. And Gary, you probably have more information, or someone on your staff has more information than I do. But that is the calculation. It doesn't go into who's at fault.
So sometimes there's a challenge with calculations that are purely based on the population. And I'll tell you why, because here, there's no other jurisdiction in America that has 75 million visitors that come. Right. And so that kind of, I think, skews the data sometimes. And so that's why I said that earlier, we really need to kind of understand that. The board needs to understand the criteria, and next board meeting would be a good opportunity, I think. All of our, in terms of it being investigated, every one of these situations that involve a pedestrian, if there's an injury, it's investigated by, law enforcement, and then the respective local jurisdictions, traffic engineering division looks at it, and, there are adjustments made. Sometimes it's an engineering fix, infrastructure fix that occurs. But it's really, I think, more global than that. So I don't want to beat the dead horse here, but I think you all get the picture. So
Yeah, and can I just add something also off of what Commissioner DeLauria said? He's correct. That factor of the percent commute has been really the deciding factor with Orlando. Mike and I have looked at these numbers over the past couple of years, and just comparing Orlando to Miami. Miami has a 3% versus our 1%, which is a big deciding factor within our ranking.
Commissioner Constantine,
thank you, Commissioner January. Yeah, I'm going to be finished. I mean, I think that the comments that have been made, we all understand that there are factors that make us, unfortunately, it's going to be hard for us to get out of the top, whatever. But as I think Commissioner DeLauria is trying to say, it's perception is reality. We are related to the, tourist related. So whatever we can do to help us get away from number one, even if it was number two or number three, would go a long way. As Mayor Demings and Mayor Dyer said, there's a reason that it's always in the Sunshine States. There's a reason that it's tourist-related areas. We all understand that. So, but perception is reality. So I think we're all dedicated to try to get us at least out of that number one position. That would even mean a lot if we could get to two.
Honestly,
Unless they start calculating tourism into some sort of formula into our population number, I see it very difficult of us getting out of that number 1 or 2 spot moving forward. I know for Osceola County, we have a population of now like 375,000, and we have millions and millions and millions and millions of tourists that come each year. So, I mean, how does that make us look just in general? Secretary Perdue, I'll give you the opportunity if you would like to address the board on any of this, and we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. These will be the last comments on this item. I'm going to ask for a motion for postponement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity. And this is a very weighty discussion. There's so many things to be addressed here. It's very, very important to, obviously, to everybody on this board. It's very important to FDOT. Pedestrian safety is a huge focus of ours. We do have a Vision Zero at FDOT. We take it very seriously. And you know, I think that the board has expressed some wisdom this morning in wanting to do a deep dive in the Dangerous by Design report. That is just one report. It uses data points. What those data points are, I think it's important to look at them because, you know, as someone mentioned, there is a lot of really good work going on, and all of your teams at the local government level are highly focused on pedestrian safety. We have extreme collaboration. It's one of the areas where we always see eye to eye. And we work very closely. We have millions of dollars of lighting projects that are underway right now, being designed and planned. We have very innovative projects. We have a resurfacing project on Orange Blossom Trail that we've turned into a pedestrian safety improvement project in coordination with Orange County. We're going to be implementing a lot of innovative ideas there because, again, the idea is we need to move the needle. We have a Vision Zero. So, you know, I think it's wise to explore the data and how they arrived at the conclusions they did in Dangerous by Design, because what it's not highlighting is all the good things that we're doing and how focused your teams are on pedestrian safety because of your leadership. And so I just wanted to point that out. I wanted to highlight that and let you know that we're very focused on this, and we're going to keep pushing and we're going to keep fighting and we're going to get there. We're going to improve pedestrian safety in Central Florida. We have millions of tourists coming to this area, and the transportation infrastructure that was planned and built in the mid-1900s was very vehicle-focused. It's time for complete streets. It's time for community-oriented projects. It's time to focus on all the different modes and do a deep dive in behavior and figure out how can we make the interaction between a vehicle and pedestrian safe. How do we do that? There's a lot of opportunities there. There's a lot of challenges ahead, but it's a great discussion, and I admire your focus and leadership on it.
Okay, thank you very much, Secretary.
Madam Chair, one last thing.
Okay, yes.
I want to point out, Mayor Demings was asking me about the parking. I want to point out that I walked over, so I walked over to doing my part to increase the percentage of people that are walking.
Well, I will tell you, I did not walk from Osceola County, so I did not do my part this morning. So we will go ahead and address a motion to postpone this item.
Motion to continue.
Second, Uribe. Okay, we have a motion to continue to our next meeting, Commissioner Galari, and a second by Commissioner Uribe, and this is just a voice vote, so all in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, let the record note that item passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Lepp, for all your time on the hot seat on that item.
Well, thank you for the discussion.
We have action items, information items for acknowledgement in your package on tab 5. Commissioner Laurie?
I'd like to make a motion to approve item 10A through J, excluding G. I have a question.
Okay.
Second.
We have, so we have a motion to approve items A through J with the exception of G by Commissioner Galari and a second by Mayor McDonald. All in favor, please state aye. Aye. Commissioner Galari, item G.
Okay, thank you. And again, Madam Chair, just real quick, first of all.
And item G, for the record, is the FDOT District 5 Work Program presentation.
Two issues I have. One is I know that Point Siena Parkway into I-4 and State Road 429 interchange, that's really a key in this area, and I don't really see it moving forward in the 5-year work plan, and I wanted to point that out. And I really think that we should be somehow looking at that, if not here, then in the beyond the I-4 Ultimate project. I think that's something that we really should be looking at. And then the other thing I wanted to make a comment about is fair share equity across the region. I don't see it, and I see that equity could be a big issue as we move forward. And I'd like to have more information about fair share equity, either in safety or something across the region. I don't have that document. And Gary, or the Secretary, someone from DOT, how do we get more information?
Yes, Madam Chair. I've been meeting with the DOT staff, Lorene Bobo, and also Secretary Perdue, on the fair share reports. And there was some discussion about what they show and what the formatting, essentially, of them, and how we might make that better by working together to make it better. And the issue is that typically a lot of the money that's being spent is lumped into Orange County, when we know that it's spent. We know that it's spent, and the links money, for example, appears to be spent in Orange County for accounting purposes, but we know that it's being spent in Seminole. We know that it's being spent in Osceola. And then there's also an outstanding question about how is the I-4 Ultimate really being shown in the fair share report. Is that all Orange County, or is the piece in Seminole properly accounted for in the fair share report? And so we're working through those issues, and so that will be coming. Regarding the Point Siena, Commissioner, that may be a CFX project that is moving forward that wouldn't be a part of the.
Needs to be addressed
somehow.
Yeah,
I agree.
Excuse me.
Where I used to work at Disney, that was always a tie-up, even coming down south, because it used to back up all the way through on I-4 through Central Florida. I mean, that was always the bottleneck.
Yep.
Yeah,
Madam,
I do believe that's being addressed in CFX. We have somebody virtually that wants to say something.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you. We have a representative from the Turnpike on the attendee side that would like to speak, Carol Scott. I'm going to allow her to talk now, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yes.
A representative from the Turnpike.
From the Turnpike.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Carol.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yes, I just thank you, Commissioner DeLaury, for your comment about the Point Siena Parkway extension. That is definitely a needed corridor. I did want to point out that the Turnpike, actually, we just kicked off a project development environment study for that Point Siena Parkway extension from County Road 532 to Interstate 4. That is a PD&E study that I believe it was shared in the PD&E tracker last month, possibly. We don't have any current information on it. We did just kick it off, but we have definitely committed to keeping the MPO informed as the study progresses. And as we have we're going to have a kickoff meeting this summer, so we'll let you guys know when that's going to be occurring.
Great.
Thank you very much, Ms. Scott. You know, just my comments on the equity report. Sometimes it could be a misleading, not only for what Gary mentioned, but also sometimes there's a year where there's a big project in one area that could be seminal. It looks like it's being unfair, but they've been waiting 3 or 4 or 5 years for it. Vice versa, it could be Osceola's turn. It also depends a lot in if the area is ready to receive that project in case of matches or contributions. So there's a lot of things that you have to look at besides that, I think. So it is a little bit misleading in a certain way. So I'm going to want to entertain a motion for acceptance after your last comment.
I'm trying to realize this is a 5-year work program, so I understand about the 5 years, and I'm also understanding all your points are very accurate. But with this, I just wanted to make sure we need to have more clarity to understand that the dollars are being, where they're being used and when they're being used. That's my biggest issue.
Okay, thank you. Point well taken. So do we have a motion for acceptance?
So moved.
Item G. Motion by Commissioner Sembaro. Do you have a second? Uribe. Second by Uribe. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, we have one no from Commissioner Delary on that item. Item passes. Thank you very much. We are going to go ahead and loop back very quickly with Ms. Whittington before we start our presentations. Is she ready?
Virginia, are you available?
Sure. Madam Chairman, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we do hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, very quickly, the legislative session started, as you all know, on March 2nd. And just 2 weeks ago, after your board meeting, we held a series of virtual drop-ins with members of the Central Florida Legislative Delegation and or their staff. Senator Broder's staff, Representatives Carlos Smith, Fred Hawkins, Camilla Brown, they were all in attendance at these drop-ins, and we were fortunate enough to have Representative David Smith and Representative Kristen Arrington attend personally. We briefed them on our priorities, and we used the time to say thank you to Representative Arrington and to brief her on the item that she is carrying the water for us on, and that is the appropriation request to expand the Best Foot Forward for Pedestrian Safety program. Just last week, the bill received unanimous approval from the House Infrastructure and Tourism Appropriations Subcommittee. This was step one in getting those funds into the budget. Subsequent to those meetings, we sent a copy of our legislative priorities to all of our Senate and House delegation members and their staff. And so we are looking forward to being able to also follow up with a copy of this Dangerous by Design report that came out to add emphasis to the importance of this initiative to Central Florida. Your second top priority has to do with bicyclist safety. Two bills have been filed. House Bill 605 and Senate Bill 950 has been filed to add state bicyclists into the vulnerable road users and to ensure that drivers completely move over and vacate the lane. Neither of these bills have been calendared in committee as of yet, but hopefully we will see some movement as things continue. Other items that you are monitoring on your monitor list, you asked us to monitor any activity having to do with mid-block crossings. There were two bills filed. One is House Bill 1113 by Representative Fine and Senate Bill 1412 by Senator Perry. This is relating to traffic and pedestrian safety, which is code for mid-block crosswalks. The bill is known as the Sophia Nelson Pedestrian Safety Act, and it requires a study to be conducted by a licensed professional engineer before the installation of pedestrian crosswalks on public highways, streets, or roads that is located at any other point than at an intersection with another public highway, street, or road. It also has some criteria that it is, has to do with speed limits on certain roads. And the bill requires FDOT to submit to the federal government a request for authorization for red, regular, rapid flashing beacon traffic control devices to replace yellow ones that are currently in use. And the bill seeks to do that by October 1st of 22. If it's approved, the yellow, regular, rapid flashing beacons are to be replaced with red ones within 12 months of authorization. If denied, the entities with jurisdictions over the crosswalks must remove all yellow, regular, rapid flashing beacons from crosswalks described in the bill by October 1st of 25. Entities with jurisdictions over those crosswalks may retrofit with quote unquote legally acceptable equipment. And of course, we're keeping our eye on this because there is no mention of who pays for the removal or installation of those. They were referred to 3 committees. They have not been calendared as of yet. Again, we'll keep you posted on it. And then last month, you all had a significant amount of conversation about Senate Bill 62, which seeks to diminish the role of regional planning councils. It had been referred to 3 committees. It passed its first. The Judiciary Committee on the Senate side met yesterday, and it was not calendared on that committee. And so, and there still is no House companion. And so we'll keep an eye on it and keep you all posted. And so with that, I will ask if you have any questions.
Any quick questions for Ms. Whittington? Okay, thank you very much for the update. We appreciate it. We'll move on with our presentations. Our first presentation is a presentation on signal retiming, crash impact assessment. Ms. Bach?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Good morning, board members. I am here this morning, I think, to continue the conversation about safety and report out on analysis we did to answer a question that we received from one of our TAC members. Next slide, please. The question was with regards to our traffic signal retiming program that we do every year and whether or not it has an impact on crash activity. Next slide, please. Before I get into the details of the analysis that we did and our findings, just wanted to give a high-level overview of our traffic signal retiming program for those who are not familiar. Annually, MetroPlan Orlando funds at least $1 million in signal retimings throughout the region. We choose which corridor segments are going to be retimed based on requests that we receive from our maintaining agencies. We're supported by several consultant teams who go out and do the field work, coordinate with the maintaining agencies, do the analysis, then actually implement the retimings. And overall, the goals of the program are about improving efficiency, often through end-to-end travel time along these corridor segments, improving safety, and then reducing the amount of idling we have at lights, and so that we can reduce emissions and improve air quality. Next slide, please. So for the analysis methodology, we did a very, very high level comparison of some crash statistics looking at the before and after a set of retimings we did on corridors from fiscal year 2015 through fiscal year 2018. There are about 109 corridor segments that were included in that set. And we compared crash information from 2011 for our before year versus 2019 for our after year. And what we looked at were differences in the total number of crashes along these segments, the differences in crash rates in terms of crashes per mile, any differences that we might see in terms of crash severity, and then also whether or not there were differences in the number of crashes depending on the type of roadway that we looked at. Next slide, please. So this slide just gives sort of a high-level overview of which corridors were retimed within that 2015 to 2018 timeframe that I mentioned before. You can see which corridors generally were retimed each year. And probably the most interesting thing on this slide is you can see that there are a few corridor segments that were retimed more than once within that 4-year period, which is fairly common. It changes by jurisdiction, but a rule of thumb for a few of our jurisdictions is about every 3 years, some of the major corridors get retimed. That is sometimes moved up and corridors are retimed more frequently if there are major changes in traffic patterns, major changes in development, and or they're just receiving a significant number of complaints on any of the corridors. And conversely, corridors that are performing well, sometimes that retiming happens more than every 3 years. Next slide, please. So moving on to the findings, this particular slide shows by year how many corridors were retimed for each year. And then we look, the next few rows in the table show for each year how many corridors we saw a reduction in crashes for, looking at different types, including total crashes, bicycle and pedestrian crashes, injury crashes, fatality crashes, and then how many corridors we saw a reduction in the crash rates. And sort of overall, we saw that the crashes and crash rates increased on most of the corridors that we looked at, and that there were no statistically significant benefits in terms of reducing the number of crashes or significantly reducing the crash rate. And so when we saw these results, next slide, please, we decided to also take a look and see if there were any differences in those results depending on the types of roadways we were looking at for instance, was there a significant reduction in crashes on principal arterial like a 1792 or State Road 436 versus a minor arterial like a Ronald Reagan Boulevard? And our takeaway there was, again, we saw no statistically significant impacts in terms of major reductions in the number of crashes or in the crash rates. Next slide, please. So this is my caveat slide. As I mentioned before, this is a very sort of high-level analysis that we did, and there are a number of variables that can impact the number of crashes that we're seeing, including increases in traffic volume. You know, as traffic volumes increase, we do tend to see an increase in the number of crashes. We did not correct for that. Roadway improvements obviously can have an impact on the number of crashes. And so we did not remove corridors where there were roadway improvements or significant changes in the roadway that may have impacted the crash analysis. We didn't look at changes in development. And perhaps most importantly, we didn't look at changes in the crash type. So there may have been some corridors where there were significant reductions in the amount of rear end crashes versus other types of crashes. We did not do that for this sort of high level analysis, but if there's interest, we can do some corridor by corridor analyses where we can take all of this into account and sort of present more findings. I also wanted to note that as we're doing the traffic signal retimings, there are adjustments made and thought about, considered for every corridor that do relate to safety. We look at adjusting the clearance time to give cars more yellow time to reduce the number of people that are running red lights. We quite often look at the pedestrian timing at our signals, in particular near schools, to either give some leading pedestrian intervals or to increase the pedestrian time. We also, the traffic signal retiming, we aim to increase the amount of platooning and minimize diversions, and all of this can impact the amount of crashes that we're seeing. And for this analysis, we looked at the segments that were retimed and then 300 feet on either side of the segments, which does not take into account any improvements that we may have seen sort of outside of these corridors. And I think that the signal retiming can have impacts beyond where the signals are. And I also want to note that though we didn't see a significant reduction in our crash rates, we didn't see a significant increase either in crash rates, while at the same time we were in effect increasing the speeds on most of these corridors. So I think we can take that as something in the win column. Next slide. And speaking of wins, one of the things that MetroPlan Orlando also funds annually, in addition to the signal retimings, is a study, a before and after analysis study of the retiming program for that year to look at a variety of factors that are sort of summarized on this slide to see how the retiming program did for that year. This particular slide shows our summary for the fiscal year 2019 retimings that we did. That was the last before and after that we've completed. We're still working on the one for 2020. But for that year, for the quarter segments that were retimed,
the board members could read the slide. If you could just kind of move forward and try to wrap this up. We're very behind on our schedule.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So basically this slide just summarizes that there are some significant impacts that we're getting. While we may not be seeing impacts in the number of, in terms of crash reduction, we do see some travel time savings. And you can see what the 3-year benefit is in terms of dollars that we saw from that program. Next slide. This slide shows our benefit cost ratio over the years since MetroPlan Orlando has been doing the signal retiming program. And in general, you can see that our benefit cost ratio continues to be high, but we have seen a decrease in the benefits that we're seeing in terms of efficiency and travel time savings. And so we have been working with our maintaining agencies to encourage them to help us look at other measures that we can look at and ways that the traffic signal retiming program is beneficial, including looking at more safety measures. Next slide, please. And I do want to also note that one of the other benefits that we do get from the retiming program is it gives us the opportunity to coordinate with some of our other modes. I talked a bit earlier about some of the things that we do in terms of making pedestrians, making that walkability factor a little bit better in some areas, but we are also able to coordinate with modes like buses and then obviously Sunrail, as I show on the slide. There are some areas throughout the region where we had some issues with traffic signal timings around where the stations are. And so we were able to, both Sunrail adjusted their schedule in some areas and also were able to do some retiming in some areas to help with that. And that is my last slide. So I'm happy to address any questions that the board may have.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to
Madam
our
Chair?
final, yes,
I do
I'm
have a
sorry,
question.
Commissioner Sembauer, you do have a
I
question.
realize this was, as stated, a high-level look. I would wonder what weight or what consideration was given to the improved technology and crash worthiness of the automobiles?
We didn't, we,
Scored the fatalities and the injuries that were on your list.
I'm sorry, can you restate the question?
Sure. What weight, if any, was given to the scoring of the fatalities and deaths based on improved technology in the motor vehicles?
We did not wait for that in this analysis.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. So we will now move on to a presentation and something that we talked a lot about today, the Best Foot Forward program. We do have Miss Emily Hanna here, which is now the Executive Director of Bike Walk Central Florida. Ms. Hanna?
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and the rest of the board members. My name is Emily Hanna, and I am the new Executive Director of Bike Walk Central Florida. And I'm here today to update you on the Best Foot Forward program and some of the things we've got geared up for 2021. So next slide, please. Can you click it one more time so the rest of the images show up? Thank you. One more time. I apologize. So this slide gives you a representation of the coalition partners that are currently a part of the Best Foot Forward program. And as a reminder to our board members, the Best Foot Forward program uses enforcement, low-cost engineering, and education to create better driver yield rates at crosswalks. And we do this by evaluating the driver yield rate by collecting data at these crosswalks, both before an enforcement operation and after those enforcement operations. And we look to see if the combination of the low-cost engineering, education, and enforcement is improving those yield rates, which ultimately makes a pedestrian feel much safer when crossing the road. Next slide, please. And so we do this by identifying crossing locations that either have dangerous conditions, they are slated for engineering improvements, or they are brought up in the events or presentations we do across the three-county region. And these crosswalks are identified mostly by our steering committee partners, which are representatives of the local municipalities that participate in the program. And this is a snapshot of the locations just for 2021. In the entire program, we monitor and collect data on well over 200 crosswalks across the three-county region. Next slide, please. And so we want to show you the benefits of including the Best Foot Forward program in your pedestrian safety efforts. This is an example of Edgewater Drive and Shady Lane. This road actually received complete street improvements in 2012, and this crossing was still not ideal for a pedestrian. Cars only yielded 25% of the time. And so after a yellow rectangular rapid flashing beacon was installed in 2016, along with high visibility enforcement and education, specifically in this community, the yield rate started to increase, and we continue to see a great success at this specific crosswalk. Next slide, please. And so to date, the Best Foot Forward program has educated, as I like to call it, over 11,000 drivers of Florida's yield law. We've completed 490 enforcement details. A detail is every time an enforcement partner goes out and enforces the driver yield law at one specific crosswalk. When we do our Operation Best Foot Forwards, we use multiple details in one operation. We've monitored, like I said, well over 200 crosswalks to date, and we've educated now 591 people in done presentations in the three-county region. Next slide, please. And so the Best Foot Forward program has always been a part of MetroPlan's long-term pedestrian safety vision, and they want to continue to expand that program. So this is just a representation of the timeline as how we've expanded that program, first into launching it in Orange and the city of Orlando, then expanding it into Osceola County and those cities in the county. And then lastly, we've expanded into Seminole County, and Seminole County actually approved to fund that program in December of 2020. And now we are looking at expanding into the smaller municipalities that make up each county. So we are currently seeking additional support from those municipalities as well. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of some of the new changes that are coming to the Best Foot Forward program, and we think will obviously help align with the pedestrian safety improvements that your board and your commissions would like to see. So we're starting by doing crosswalk audits, and we are inviting our partners from the steering committee to these audits to look at maintenance, and that includes striping and signage. And we're providing these crosswalk audits and these recommendations of updates to certain crosswalk locations to time with their fiscal budget cycle. So we're hoping that by providing specific recommendations to these crossings that we can get into a municipality's CIP program, or if not, if it's a larger project, then this is something that we'd like to bring to the MetroPlan Orlando board to see if they can support these safety improvements throughout the region. Additionally, we are creating an online resource for the public and for our users. Right now, we collect this data and have it in multiple Excel spreadsheets. And so we've recently purchased an Esri license, which is GIS. And so we're able to put our data into a GIS platform. These dots will ultimately represent information on each crosswalk that we monitor in the program. And you will be able to click on each of these dots and it'll tell you how many enforcements were done at that location, how many presentations have we done, what is the baseline, and how has the crosswalk improved as far as its driver yield rate goes. Next slide, please. And then ultimately, we thank you for supporting the Best Foot Forward program, and more importantly, having that as your #1 legislative priority for this year. But we also want to encourage you to share our message and what we're trying to do in the community with your colleagues and your other representatives. We would like for you to invite us to educate. I think as everyone saw, events that we were able to participate in 2020 dwindled. And so we had to pivot quickly to make sure that our message still got out to the community virtually. We are starting to attend events again when they are held and when we are invited. So please continue to share those opportunities with us, because we do need to reach those vulnerable users that might not necessarily have access to this information virtually. And also another program of Bike Walk Central Florida that I think some of you are familiar with is our Bike 5 Cities event. This is going to take place this year, October 30th, and will kick off Mobility Week in our Central Florida region. And then ultimately, please continue to support Complete Streets, bicycle and pedestrian friendly infrastructure, and continue to put your best foot forward. Next slide, please. And this is just a shot of our board that was socially distanced at our last Bike 5 Cities event that took place October 3rd in 2020. There's some additional information down here, and I would also like to state that our board chair and co-founder is also listening in, along with our other coalition partners as well, who support the program. That concludes my presentation, and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, we have time for a quick question or two. No? Commissioner Delari.
Two quick questions, or one comment and a question. I know that Bike Multiple Cities is in October. If you can give us each, or at least us, I'd like to do a resolution of support for that from our county perspective. I think that would be advantageous. And then the other thing is, can you give us any feedback, since you guys are involved with the pedestrian aspect of it, on your feelings about Dangers by Design report?
Absolutely. So I was able to read that report fully before it came out. We were fortunate enough to get an embargoed copy. And I would like to make one point, is that though we are #1, we are one of the most improved regions. 84 out of 100 metro statistical areas within that report got worse, but we did not. We improved significantly. And I think it's the work of your board and our local partners, along with the coalition that we have through Best Foot Forward, making an impact on pedestrian safety. And that is a goal of mine, is to continue to push the needle and to streamline the low-cost engineering improvements in our education, so that we're really targeting the populations that we need to target in order to make a difference and hopefully remove us from the #1 list. That's not something we want to be #1 at.
Thank you so much. We will now, thank you very much, Ms. Hannah. We appreciate you being here with us today and your great work within our region. So we'll go ahead and move on to our general public comment section. Ms. Lambert, do we have anybody either virtually or that signed up to do a public comment?
We didn't receive any cards yet, but let me just give it a moment on the virtual side. If anybody would like to make a public comment, you are welcome to raise your hand, and you can do so by hitting that button on your toolbar that says raise hand. And Madam Chairwoman, I do not see any raised hands at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Lambert. Do we have any further board member comments? Okay, our next meeting will be Wednesday, May 12th at 9 a.m. So we do not have a meeting in April. There's no further comments. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here.